few years ago, everyone on the internet decided that they were a reader, and it was this very beautiful and kind of terrifying thing to watch as they've sort of struggled to figure out what that actually means. I'm not a sociologist, I'm definitely not a media studies student or a human psychologist, so I don't really want to talk about the internet aspect of this too much because I know that what I'm saying is probably so surface level or probably completely incorrect. But I do kind of just want to analyze a trend that I've been seeing and how I feel, maybe my suggestion as somebody who's been a reader for a long time, and how we can kind of overcome this trend in a way that makes us more honest readers. Maybe just my advice. Reading as a counterculture is very interesting. I do think that reading has, risen at the same time that we have seen this rise in like AI slop and garbage on the internet, a lot of mis and disinformation. Whenever I scroll online, I find myself being like, what am I watching? I've noticed that no one is really an expert on the things that they're talking about anymore. Sometimes I'll read a book about a subject and I'll be like, this is so fascinating. I feel like I've been missing this recently. And it's because when I spend time on the internet, I am learning about things, I am ingesting information, but I really don't feel like I'm getting that depth of knowledge that you do get when you read something that, is peer-reviewed and written by an expert, and that's something I think the internet is missing a lot. So having reading as a counterculture where people are investing their time into genuine pieces of knowledge and work that have been painstakingly edited and, passed down through generation and whatever, I think that that's pretty cool. And I think that if it comes at the expense of having people, matching their book to their outfit, okay. So I just wanted to begin by kind of legitimizing reading as a counterculture and explaining that it actually probably is a positive one. It's a reaction to a genuinely difficult problem that we're seeing with the internet, which is like, because anybody can be publishing anything, then it's completely unfiltered, unlike ever before. I remember when I was a kid and teachers would be like, don't look at Wikipedia, it's got loads of misinformation. People aren't even looking at Wikipedia anymore. I mean, they're watching nonsense. But I think with the rise of reading in an era of algorithmic internet, where oftentimes videos are being made in reference to other videos on the algorithm, right? People will watch something on their TikTok page and then they'll make a TikTok in response to that. In this massive conversation, I think something really bizarre has emerged, and I think that is the emergence of something I'm going to call the online canon. I'm sure there's a better name for it. For those who don't know what a canon is, I'm going to get the online definition. So the literary canon is a collection of works considered to be the most important and influential books in a particular genre or time period, often seen as essential reading within a culture. The canon is something that was referenced a lot during the early parts of my university degree. I've also read a lot of books that would be considered like canonical, but the canon basically is a collection of books that are considered great, to be written by the greatest human thinkers, and oftentimes they reference one another, so they're canonical as in they all kind of connect to one another, and when you enter into a literary space, you begin with one of them and you kind of read your way through this canon, with the idea being that in order to understand great literature, you must rely on this canon of great thinkers. Immediately, there's a problem that arises with the idea of the canon, and that problem is obviously that when you have this idea of great books, you need somebody to define what a great book is. And oftentimes that's just the in-group defining that. So you've got universities and just like general literary institutions that are defining this, and oftentimes the books that they prop up as like great books are written by white men of European descent, European authors. And so the literary canon is this kind of very closed off, narrow space that hasn't let a lot of people in. That's been a deep critique that people have had about literary spaces generally and the universities generally, is that they uphold these books that are kind of just great based on arbitrary ideas about what's good, and this canon kind of excludes loads of other thinkers. I mean, some of the greatest books ever written have never ever been considered canonical or part of the literary canon because they don't come from authors or from global spaces that would be considered like acceptable, right? Charles Dickens or Shakespeare, Ovid, Aristophanes, these people who are considered great throughout human history. The idea of the canon is that if you've read these books, then you're smart and you understand the full complexity of human history, right? I think what's super cool about emerging internet reading culture is that what's also emerged is this kind of new canon, right? Something that I would just call like the online canon or the emerging online canon that's kind of shaped completely by algorithms. I think how it begins is you've got people who make videos being like, my top must-reads for 2025, right? And they list all the books that they've read. And in there are those kind of weird, off the beaten path, kind of like reads that they pick up over time, right? You've got like a Western that went out of print in 1970, or like a self-published Japanese novel by a woman in her basement in 2005, right? These kind of cool, indie, bizarre, kind of way outside the canon books coming into the mainstream and joining this kind of literary canon, because people will watch that video, add it to their reading list, read it, and then talk about it, right? And if it's a genuinely good book, then it spreads and spreads and spreads. So yeah, we've got this cool kind of new canon that's emerging out of internet culture that's based on recommendations from anybody versus just, institutions that are kind of coming top down, stating, if you haven't read Great Expectations and you're not a real reader. You've got people recommending these books that are so cool. One thing I've seen that people have been reading a lot of is James Baldwin. That's amazing. The average person reading and loving James Baldwin is so cool. It's so great. But I wonder if there's troubles with just replacing the original canon with another canon. Even if this canon is inclusive, it's still following along in some of the same patterns that the original canon kind of fell into. So even though there is this new, beautiful, emerging canon that is bringing in more people from the outgroup, that's more democratic, that's more vibrant and colorful, I wonder if creating a new canon to replace the old canon is actually solving the problem. I would argue no, not at all. I mean, for one, the online literary canon is a complete mess. From the very beginning, it's based on suggestions from all over the place, thus recreating the same problem that we've been having with the internet, which is just this mass of information, this overwhelming amount of information that no one is ever going to be able to digest, approach in any sort of capacity, right? The other thing about it is that the problem with the original canon was that it supposed universality. It put forward these books, right, the Canterbury Tales, the Odyssey, 1984, and said, these are universal reads that everyone will understand. And this is kind of what the online canon is doing again. It's stating that these are the greatest books of all time, and if you haven't read these books, then you're not really a reader, you're not really interesting, you're not really pushing yourself and having intellectual curiosity. If you haven't read The Wall or Giovanni's Room or something. Those are only two examples. Both are good books, but you know what I'm trying to say. The internet canon is just as much an imposition as the original canon is, because the problem with the original canon wasn't that it brought together a bunch of books, because I do think that a lot of the, classic canonical reads are really great books. They do feel pertinent. Oftentimes you're reading this and you're like, how did somebody write this, 200 years ago, and it's still so relevant, right? The problem wasn't with the books that were chosen. The problem was that the books were chosen. The books were chosen for you. I mean, reading is a deeply personal thing. In fact, reading might be the most personal thing, which is why I think sometimes I have reservations about watching other people talk about books or reading articles about other people talking about books online, is because it feels kind of like reading is this intimate thing that I only share with myself and the people closest to me, and the internet makes it this kind of free-for-all public sort of occurrence versus, keeping it close to your chest. Beyond that, I wonder if instead of creating a new canon, or instead of watching other people create a new canon, if what we can challenge ourselves to do is to work to create our own canon. Obviously, you can't call it a canon, because that wouldn't work if it's personal. So I have another metaphor for you guys, which I'm hoping I can explain, because so far all I have is just these two horrible pictures that I sketched on my walk. But basically, I see the current online space of reading and talking about books as being similar to like a public pool. It's this kind of space, it's a little bit stagnant, and everyone's kind of just swimming around in it and bumping into one another, having a lot of the same thoughts and opinions, reading a lot of the same things. the water's not really moving. We're all engaging with one another, but there's nothing new kind of coming in. And it's a public pool, so it's busy and it's crowded and it's overwhelming and it's loud. And how can you read in an environment like that? How could you enjoy the water in an environment that's so full of people and crammed and loud? That's the online literary space at the moment. That's how I see it. I think what I want to encourage people maybe to move toward a little bit more is something that looks a little bit more like a stream, like a literary stream or a river. And it kind of begins flowing from one place, wherever that place may be. You don't even need to know where the water's coming from, but it kind of curves and follows its own path, going off in different directions, coming back together, but there's constant movement, and it's kind of quieter and more personal and peaceful, right? And maybe it connects with other people's streams, and then maybe it kind of veers back off to itself. But there's no stagnance, because I think the internet, unfortunately, has created a little bit of stagnance. This literary stream, it's thin, it stays sharp. Even though it kind of moves like lackadaisically wherever it wants, there's still a purpose. It's water flowing from one place to another. I suppose a literary stream is kind of like this. I wrote down my literary stream. I'd be so interested if you guys wanted to comment your own. This is just my weird little metaphor. I'm going to write this all down on my Substack and maybe publish this in words so that it makes a little more sense. But I'm kind of just chit-chatting this out. I had all these ideas about book lists and reading lists online, and I just kind of didn't really know how to put them together. So then I set up my camera to kind of talk it out, and then I was like, why don't I just film a proper YouTube video and chat with you guys about it? Because I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about it. So here's my literary stream, okay? I've recently been reading E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, which was recommended to me by a woman who taught a Cambridge Lit course on Virginia Woolf, which I ended up taking because I love Mrs. Dalloway, which I ended up reading after I read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. And that book was actually recommended to me all the way back in high school because I was standing next to this woman at the bus stop, and she saw me reading Yearning by Bell Hooks, and she thought that would be a good next place for me to go because we got to chatting about books. And so this is my stream, right? It's kind of been flowing since I was a kid. It began when I started reading. It began with the first book I picked up, and it's continued on through the people I've talked to and the random things I've picked up at used bookstores, the conversations I've had, the friends I've had. My stream is all very personal. And like the internet reading culture, it's messy, it's all over the place, but it's mine. It's not stagnant, it's constantly moving, and it makes sense because it has a journey. It has somewhere to go. When you're just reading whatever people are telling you to read, you're not going anywhere, you're just following somebody, right? And oftentimes, following somebody just leads to you kind of just swimming in circles. I'm not saying that being a reader is something that has an end goal. A stream doesn't have an end goal. It opens up as the ocean, maybe, I don't know. Your stream is just kind of more about the journey, right? You're just kind of floating down it. That's how I see reading, I guess. I don't know if this metaphor is working. I can't tell. I'll only be able to tell when I'm editing this video. And I'm like, what am I talking about? Sometimes I find myself going a little too far with my metaphors. I want to be able to trace my reading, I want to be able to trace it backwards and forwards. How do you expect to understand the conversation that an author is taking part in without listening to the whole thing? Without going on to the next book or the book that inspired them, right? And I recognize my hypocrisy. I really do love to talk about books on the internet, and oftentimes that culminates in me giving suggestions. But I think rather than telling people what's good or bad, I think it's more about talking about what you like and why you liked it. I think the truth is that there are a million, brilliant, life-changing books out there, but truly the only ones that actually matter are the ones that you read. And you and we're never going to catch up on the books suggested online, right? We're never going to be a part of this little club of readers that have all read the best, coolest books. And that's a good thing too, because I think that the best bit of reading is talking about books with others. And talking about books with others requires that we've all read something a little bit different, and we're all coming from a different place, right? So my suggestion is, don't trust strangers with something so deeply intimate as reading. Buy a book because you like it. No more planning, no more long, unending reading lists that overwhelm you just to look at because they're full of stuff that you honestly are not that interested in. You know what? Go out there and buy something just because it's cheap, just because it's on sale and it has that little sticker on it, or because you like the color of the cover, or because you think that reading it in public will make you look smart. I want you to read something because it sticks out to you on the shelf and you're just judging it by the cover because you don't have anything else to go off of. That's how you build a stream. That's how you start carving your own path in your own way. The sad thing about reading, and every reader comes to this at some point, sometimes I just wake up in a panic with this thought, is that I'm not going to be able to read all the good books out there. There are so many good books out there. But I'm going to be able to read all the books I can. And I'm going to try my best. I always think it's much easier to critique something than it is to give it praise or appreciate it. And I think when it comes to reading in the online space, there is a lot of positive, super cool things coming out of it. But I do think that reading is deeply personal. And I think that as a reader, what you choose to read, that's your life. That's your legacy. That's what you do, right? It's cool to listen to recommendations to get a place to start, but how you go on in this kind of like reading journey, that's yours. And you should be confident, you should be resolute, it should be personal. Take the lessons, take the critiques that we have of the original literary canon and apply those to this online emerging canon, and you'll see that there are a lot of similarities. You know, there are still in-groups and out-groups, right? There are still hierarchies being built, and there are still authors that are being pushed over other authors. There are still people and voices being left out, and those voices and people you will never find if you don't start looking. A little while ago, I found this author, Helen Oyeyemi. A lot of people probably know who she is because she's quite famous. I'd never heard of her. She's one of my favorite authors of all time now, and I literally just bought her book because I saw it in a used bookstore, and the cover was just this really pretty kind of like robin's egg blue. It just kind of looked really nice. So, you know, have fun, be creative, I don't know. Comment down below your stream. I'd be interested in hearing what you've read, what you're going to read, whatever. Anyways, thanks for listening to my rant. I love you guys so much, and I will see you next week. Oh no, I don't know if I'll see you next week. I'm going to Scotland in 5 days, so I might be a bit preoccupied, but I'll see you soon. Bye!